Welcome to the Lost in Disclosure. Tonight, we drift into dark water. The Atlantic Ocean stretches before us, 3,000 miles of rolling blue, hiding valleys deeper than mountains are tall. Beneath the surface, where sunlight fades to memory, the ocean floor holds its breath. And in that silence, something waits. For decades, sonar operators have detected anomalies in the deep. Echoes that shouldn't exist. Shapes too perfect to be stone. Metallic signatures where only sand and sediment should rest. These readings appear in classified Navy documents, in the logbooks of research vessels, in the quiet conversations of oceanographers who've seen things they cannot explain. This is not a story of certainty. It is a story of whispers, faint signals rising from the abyss, patterns that emerge only when we stop looking directly at them. Tonight, we follow those whispers down into the cold black water, where the pressure crushes light itself, and where the boundaries between geology and mystery begin to blur. The ocean remembers what we have forgotten. And perhaps, in its depths, it guards what we are not yet ready to find. Let us descend together, slowly, carefully, into the silent world beneath the waves. The first whispers came not from explorers, but from machines. In the years following World War II, as nations raced to map the ocean floor and track submarines through the dark, sonar technology evolved rapidly. Ships dragged acoustic arrays across the Atlantic, bouncing sound waves off the seafloor. The maps that emerged were revelations. Vast underwater mountain ranges, trenches that plunged miles into the Earth's crust, canyons that dwarfed the Grand Canyon itself. But among the expected geology, something else appeared. In 1957, a Soviet research vessel operating near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge recorded an anomaly. The sonar return showed a massive object resting on the ocean floor at a depth of nearly 4 kilometers. The shape was too symmetrical. A series of parallel lines, hard edges, geometric precision. The crew marked the coordinates, photographed the sonar readout, and continued their survey. When they returned 3 weeks later to verify the finding, the object had vanished. The seafloor showed only the usual contours of volcanic rock and sediment. The report was classified. The photographs were filed away, The crew was told to forget what they had seen. But they were not the first. And they would not be the last. Throughout the 1960s, as the Cold War deepened and the superpowers invested billions into underwater surveillance, similar reports began to accumulate. American sonar technicians detected phantom structures off the coast of Newfoundland, vast rectangular formations that appeared on multiple passes, only to disappear when submersibles were dispatched to investigate. British oceanographers mapping the Azores documented what they described as linear features of unknown origin, stretching for nearly a mile across the abyssal plain, too straight to be natural fissures, too deep to be man-made. Each report was met with the same pattern: initial excitement, followed by skepticism, then silence. The official explanations varied. Sonar artifacts, misinterpreted geological formations, equipment malfunctions. And perhaps those explanations were correct. After all, the deep ocean is a realm of illusions, where sound bends strangely through layers of temperature and salinity, where shadows can masquerade as substance. But the reports kept coming. In 1963, a French bathyscape descending into the Puerto Rico Trench, one of the deepest points in the Atlantic, captured photographs of what the pilot described as metallic debris resting at a depth of 8,000 meters. The images were grainy, distorted by pressure and darkness, but they showed something angular, something that reflected the submarine's lights in ways that rock simply does not. The French Navy examined the photographs, consulted with geologists and metallurgists,
and ultimately concluded that the images were inconclusive. The pilot disagreed. In an interview decades later, shortly before his death, he spoke quietly about what he had seen that day. "It was not natural," he said. "I have spent my life underwater. I know rock. I know coral. I know shipwrecks. This was something else. Something waiting there in the dark, patient and cold." His words were dismissed as the romantic recollections of an aging adventurer, but they echoed a sentiment that would be repeated again and again by those who had glimpsed the deep Atlantic secrets firsthand. By the early 1970s, acoustic mapping technology had advanced to the point where entire sections of the ocean floor could be scanned with unprecedented resolution. Project Famous, the French-American mid-ocean undersea study, deployed submersibles and sonar arrays along the mid-Atlantic ridge, attempting to understand the geological processes that split continents and birthed new seafloor. The scientific data they gathered revolutionized our understanding of plate tectonics. But there were anomalies in that data, features that did not fit the prevailing models. sonar returns showing cavities beneath the ridge itself, hollow spaces where solid rock should exist. Magnetic readings indicating the presence of refined metals in concentrations far higher than natural ore deposits. Temperature fluctuations suggesting heat sources unrelated to volcanic activity. The lead scientists noted these anomalies in their reports, proposing further investigation. Funding was not approved. The focus shifted elsewhere. The anomalies became footnotes, then faded from discussion entirely. And yet, for those willing to look closely at the declassified data, the questions remained. What could create such features? What processes, natural or otherwise, could leave such precise signatures in the deep? The ocean floor is ancient, layered with sediment that records millions of years of geological history. If something artificial rests beneath those layers, it would have been there long before human civilization emerged from caves and learned to sail. The thought is almost too vast to hold that beneath the Atlantic, beneath tons of water and rock and time, there might rest evidence of something that predates our entire understanding of history. But the whispers suggested exactly that. And as the decades passed, those whispers would grow louder, not through grand revelations, but through the slow accumulation of unexplained incidents, disappearances that followed patterns, sightings that clustered in specific regions, technologies that detected what should not be there. The ocean, after all, is patient. It has waited for millions of years. It can wait a little longer to reveal what it hides. But the mystery was already unfolding. Ships were vanishing, aircraft were going silent, and those who studied the patterns began to see something emerging from the noise, a corridor of strangeness cutting through the western Atlantic, a zone where the ordinary rules seemed not to apply. They called it the Atlantic Anomaly Zone, though the name appeared in no official documents. It was a region roughly defined by coordinates stretching from the Bermuda Triangle in the north to the Sargasso Sea in the south, extending eastward toward the mid-Atlantic ridge. Within this vast expanse of water, spanning hundreds of thousands of square miles, a disproportionate number of vessels had vanished without trace, not dramatically, not in storms or battles, but simply gone, as if erased from existence. The statistics were troubling when examined closely. Between 1945 and 1975, at least 17 military aircraft disappeared within this zone under clear weather conditions. 23 commercial and private vessels were lost without distress calls. Hundreds of smaller craft, fishing boats, yachts, research ships, simply failed to reach their destinations, leaving behind no wreckage, no oil slicks, no bodies. Most of these incidents could be explained. The Atlantic is treacherous, capable of sudden storms, rogue waves that tower 7 stories high, underwater currents that can drag a ship down before its crew can react. Equipment fails. Human error compounds. The ocean is unforgiving of mistakes. But some cases resisted explanation. In December 1948, a Douglas DC-3 aircraft carrying 32 passengers departed from San Juan, Puerto Rico, bound for Miami. The weather was clear, visibility excellent. 50 miles from the Florida coast, the pilot radioed the tower with a routine position report. His voice was calm, unhurried. He said, "All is well. Approaching field. We can see the lights of Miami now." The plane never landed. No distress call was ever received. Despite extensive searches involving dozens of aircraft and ships, covering thousands of square miles, not a single piece of wreckage was ever found. No floating debris, no life vests, no fuel slicks. It was as if the aircraft and everyone aboard had been plucked from the sky and swallowed whole. The official conclusion: cause unknown. 3 years later, in 1951, a Brazilian military transport plane vanished under nearly identical circumstances. Approaching the coast after a routine flight, the crew reported clear conditions and normal operations. Then, silence. No wreckage was ever recovered. In 1956, a U.S. Navy seaplane with 10 crew members disappeared between Bermuda and Norfolk. Weather? Clear. Last radio contact? Routine. Search efforts? Massive. Result? Nothing found. The pattern repeated with eerie consistency. Aircraft would be flying normally, often within sight of land, with experienced crews and well-maintained equipment. Then, in the space between one radio call and the next, they would cease to exist. The ocean would close over them like a wound healing, leaving no scar, no evidence that they had ever been there at all. The disappearances were not limited to the air. In March 1963, the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a 524-foot tanker carrying molten sulfur, departed from Beaumont, Texas, bound for Norfolk, Virginia. The ship was equipped with modern communication systems and carried a crew of 39 experienced sailors. On February 4th, while passing through the Florida Straits, the ship sent a routine position report. The weather was calm, seas moderate. The captain reported no problems. The ship was never heard from again. When it failed to arrive in Norfolk, an extensive search was launched. The Coast Guard, Navy, and Air Force scoured over 300,000 square miles of ocean. They found a life jacket, a few pieces of debris, fragments so small and scattered that they raised more questions than they answered. How could a massive steel tanker, built to withstand Atlantic storms, simply disintegrate without a single distress call? Where were the lifeboats, the life rafts, the 39 crew members? The official investigation concluded that the ship had suffered a catastrophic structural failure, but maritime experts pointed out that even in such a scenario, there would be time for a distress call, time to launch lifeboats, and far more debris than was ever found. "It's as if something reached up from below," one Coast Guard investigator remarked off the record, "and pulled the entire ship down in one motion." His comment was not included in the official report. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, the pattern continued. The yacht Snowboy vanished with all hands in 1963. The cargo ship Sylvia L. Asa disappeared with 37 crew in 1976. The tanker Grand Zenith lost with all crew in 1984. Each case followed the familiar script: routine operations, sudden silence, exhaustive searches, minimal or no wreckage recovered. Some researchers began plotting the disappearances on maps, marking each incident with coordinates and dates. When viewed collectively, a pattern emerged. The vanishings clustered in specific areas, regions that, when cross-referenced with classified sonar data, corresponded precisely to zones where underwater anomalies had been detected, something waiting there in the dark, patient and cold. The correlation was striking. Aircraft and ships were disappearing directly above locations where the ocean floor showed unexplained features, geometric formations, metallic signatures, thermal anomalies. It was as if something beneath the water was exerting an influence on the surface, creating zones of danger that moved or activated periodically. Of course, correlation is not causation. Scientists and skeptics rightly pointed out that these regions were also areas of heavy maritime traffic, complex ocean currents, and challenging weather patterns. More vessels pass through, statistically, more vessels will be lost. The human mind seeks patterns even in randomness, finding connections where none exist. But for those who had studied the cases in detail, who had interviewed survivors of near-miss incidents, who had examined the fragmentary evidence that did emerge, the pattern felt too consistent to be mere coincidence. There were the strange reports from crews who had passed through the zone and lived to tell about it. Compass malfunctions that caused needles to spin wildly, electronic equipment that failed suddenly, then resumed functioning once the ship moved out of the area. Pilots who reported seeing lights beneath the water, glowing forms that paced their aircraft for miles before descending back into the depths. In 1972, a commercial airliner flying from Puerto Rico to Bermuda encountered what the pilot described as a tunnel of white light that seemed to envelop the aircraft. For nearly 5 minutes, all electronic systems failed. Navigation, radio, even the aircraft's engines seemed to lose power. The plane dropped several thousand feet before systems suddenly restored. When they landed, the crew discovered they had arrived 30 minutes ahead of schedule, though their airspeed had never exceeded normal parameters. The incident was reported, investigated, and ultimately attributed to atmospheric anomalies and crew misperception. But the crew insisted otherwise. "We flew through something," the co-pilot stated in his report, "something that bent normal reality, and I believe others have flown through the same thing and never came out the other side." His words were dismissed as speculation, but they pointed to a possibility that was beginning to emerge in the minds of those who studied these mysteries, that the Atlantic disappearances were not accidents at all, but encounters with something that existed beneath the waves, something that occasionally reached upward to pull aircraft and ships into its domain. What that something might be, ancient technology, geological phenomena beyond current understanding, or something even stranger, remained pure speculation. But the evidence, fragmentary and frustrating though it was, suggested that the ocean floor was not merely passive geology, but an active presence, capable of influencing the world above in ways that defied conventional explanation. And if that were true, then the next logical question was unavoidable. What lay beneath the waves? What could create such effects? And if it was not natural, then who had placed it there, and for what purpose? The answers would require descending into the abyss itself, into depths where the pressure could crush steel, where darkness was absolute, and where human explorers were as fragile as whispers. The deep ocean is a world of impossible pressure and absolute night. At 4,000 meters, roughly 2.5 miles down, the pressure exceeds 5,000 pounds per square inch, enough to compress a human body into a fraction of its normal size. No light penetrates these depths. Photosynthesis is impossible, and the creatures that inhabit this realm have evolved in ways that seem alien to surface dwellers. Bioluminescent fish drift through the blackness, their bodies producing light through chemical reactions. Translucent shrimp swarm around hydrothermal vents, where superheated water erupts from the Earth's crust. The landscape is a nightmare of volcanic spires, fractured plains, and trenches that plunge even deeper into planetary darkness. It is into this hostile environment that submersibles descended in search of answers. In 1977, the research submersible Alvin made a series of dives near the Galapagos Rift, discovering hydrothermal vents and entirely new ecosystems thriving in conditions previously thought incompatible with life. The discovery revolutionized biology, proving that life could exist without sunlight, feeding instead on chemicals erupting from the planet's interior. But Alvin and other deep-sea vehicles encountered more than just exotic ecosystems during their explorations of the Atlantic floor. In 1981, during a survey mission near the mid-Atlantic ridge, Alvin descended to investigate a sonar anomaly detected by surface ships. The target was a flat region of seafloor at approximately 3,000 meters depth, notable for its unusually smooth topography. As the submersible approached, its external cameras captured something unexpected. The seafloor in this location was not natural volcanic rock or sediment. It appeared to be composed of large, flat plates arranged in a geometric pattern, hexagonal sections fitted together like tiles, each roughly 10 meters across. The surfaces were smooth, almost polished, and reflected the submersible's lights with a dull metallic sheen. The pilot maneuvered Alvin closer, attempting to collect a sample with the mechanical arm. When the sampling tool made contact, it produced a metallic scraping sound, clearly audible through the hull. The material resisted the drill bit. After several attempts, a small fragment was collected, a piece roughly the size of a coin. The fragment was brought to the surface and subjected to analysis. The results were puzzling. The sample was primarily iron and nickel, but with trace elements in ratios that did not match any known terrestrial alloys. The crystalline structure suggested it had been subjected to extreme heat and pressure, but not in patterns consistent with volcanic or tectonic processes. "It looks manufactured," one metallurgist noted in the analysis report. "The composition is too uniform, the structure too regular. But if this is manufactured, it's unlike any industrial process I'm familiar with." The official conclusion was more cautious. Sample origin remains undetermined. Further investigation recommended. That investigation never occurred. Funding was redirected. Alvin moved on to other projects. The hexagonal plates remained on the ocean floor, undisturbed, while the fragment sat in a storage facility, labeled and forgotten. But it was not an isolated discovery. In 1985,
A French-American expedition was conducting a survey near the Azores, searching for evidence of ancient volcanic activity. Their remotely operated vehicle captured video footage of what appeared to be a massive cylindrical structure partially buried in sediment. The cylinder was approximately 30 meters long and 4 meters in diameter, with a smooth surface interrupted by regular indentations that could be rivets or structural joints. The team was stunned. One researcher described it as looking like submarine hull from some unknown era, perfectly preserved, covered in a thin layer of sediment that suggested it had been there for centuries, possibly millennia. The expedition submitted a request to return with equipment capable of excavating and examining the structure. The request was denied without explanation. When the team attempted to publicize their findings through academic channels, they were quietly advised that publishing such speculation could damage their credibility and careers. The footage was archived, the coordinates were noted, but no official follow-up ever occurred. These were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, as deep-sea exploration technology improved and more submersibles ventured into the Atlantic depths, reports of unusual structures continued to surface. Pilots described finding walls of unknown material running for hundreds of meters across the seafloor. Sonar technicians detected caverns beneath the oceanic crust where geology suggested solid rock should exist. Remote cameras captured images of objects that resembled machinery, cylindrical tubes, geometric frameworks, spherical chambers, all encrusted with marine growth and sediment, suggesting immense age. In each case, the pattern was the same: initial excitement, documentation, followed by official skepticism and lack of follow-up. The structures were labeled as geological anomalies or misinterpreted natural formations. Experts pointed out that erosion and tectonic activity could create remarkably symmetrical features. Pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns and intentional design where none exists, was a powerful force, especially in the disorienting environment of the deep ocean, where lights, shadows, and sediment could create illusions. These explanations were reasonable. They were, in many cases, probably correct. The ocean floor is vast and strange. Our minds, evolved to interpret surface environments, often misread what the cameras show us. But some researchers remained unconvinced. Dr. Helena Markovich, a marine geologist who had participated in several Atlantic surveys, compiled a database of anomalous findings over a 20-year period. Her analysis, published in a small academic journal in 1998, identified 47 distinct locations where multiple independent observations had documented features inconsistent with natural geological processes. The probability of all these reports being misinterpretations or equipment errors is extremely low. We are faced with two possibilities. Either our understanding of ocean floor geology is far more incomplete than we believed, or there are artificial structures in the Atlantic of unknown age and nature.
Her paper was largely ignored by the mainstream scientific community, but it became essential reading for a small group of researchers, oceanographers, archaeologists, metallurgists, who believed the evidence demanded serious investigation rather than dismissal. They pointed to the consistency of the reports: structures made of metal or metal-like materials, often found in the same regions where sonar had detected anomalies decades earlier, located at depths that made accidental human placement impossible with any known historical technology. If these structures were artificial, the implications were staggering. Modern humans developed the ability to reach such depths only in the mid-20th century. If something manufactured rested at 3,000 or 4,000 meters depth, covered in sediment layers that took centuries or millennia to accumulate, then either an unknown ancient civilization had possessed technology far beyond what archaeology suggested, or the structures had a non-human origin. Both possibilities seemed impossible, yet the physical evidence, the metal fragments, the sonar data, the photographs and video footage existed. It could not simply be ignored because it contradicted comfortable assumptions about history and human primacy on Earth. In 2001, a private research team using advanced side-scan sonar detected what they described as a complex of structures on the seafloor north of Cuba at depths exceeding 700 meters. The sonar images showed what appeared to be geometric formations, pyramidal shapes, rectangular buildings, even what resembled streets or pathways arranged in an urban grid. The discovery generated brief international attention. Skeptics immediately proposed natural explanations: volcanic formations, sediment patterns, sonar artifacts. The research team requested funding for submersible exploration to verify the findings. That funding was difficult to secure. Eventually, in 2004, a brief submersible survey was conducted. The results were inconclusive. Some features appeared architectural, others clearly natural. The official statement emphasized uncertainty. While some formations show unusual geometric properties, definitive conclusions cannot be drawn without more extensive investigation. That extensive investigation never materialized. The site remains unexplored, the mystery unresolved. And so, the deep Atlantic keeps its secrets still. Fragments of metal that shouldn't exist, structures that echo design, images that tantalize but never quite prove. The ocean floor remains largely unmapped, a frontier more alien than the surface of Mars, hiding beneath crushing pressure and eternal darkness, whatever truths it holds. For those who believe something waits below, the evidence is sufficient. For skeptics, it is merely ambiguous data demanding extraordinary claims be met with extraordinary proof. The debate continues, unresolved, while the anomalies themselves rest in the cold silence of the abyss, patient as stone, older than memory. But there were other testimonies to consider, accounts not from machines or cameras, but from human witnesses who claimed to have seen something emerge from those depths, something that moved with purpose and intelligence through the water.
They rose from below, glowing like drowned stars. The testimonies came from sailors, pilots, submarine crews, men and women whose professions demanded reliability and level-headed observation. They spoke of objects emerging from the ocean, ascending from depths where nothing human-made could survive, then vanishing into the sky or descending back into the water without leaving trace. The reports followed a pattern. The objects were typically disc-shaped or spherical, ranging from several meters to over 30 meters in diameter. They emitted light, often a pale blue or green luminescence that seemed to emanate from their entire surface. They moved with impossible speed and maneuverability,
accelerating from stillness to hypersonic velocity in seconds, changing direction without apparent inertia, hovering motionless above the waves before plunging vertically into the water without leaving trace. Most importantly, they appeared near the same Atlantic regions where underwater anomalies had been detected and disappearances had occurred. In 1963, the crew of the aircraft carrier USS Wasp observed a glowing object pacing the ship during night operations in the Atlantic. Multiple radar operators tracked the object as it maintained position several hundred meters above the water, matching the carrier's course and speed for nearly 20 minutes. Then, without warning, the object dropped into the ocean. The ship's sonar immediately detected it beneath the surface, descending rapidly. Within seconds, it had dropped below the range of the sonar equipment, deeper than any known submarine could dive. The incident was logged and reported through Navy channels. The official explanation: probable atmospheric phenomenon or equipment malfunction. But the crew knew what they had seen. The radar returns were solid and consistent. Multiple witnesses had observed the object visually, and the sonar had tracked something physical entering the water and descending to impossible depths. Similar incidents occurred with increasing frequency throughout the 1960s and 70s. In 1967, the Argentine Navy encountered a luminous object that emerged from the water near their ships during exercises in the South Atlantic. The object hovered briefly, then divided into multiple smaller lights before submerging again. In 1971, Brazilian fishermen reported seeing a large disk rise from the water, dripping luminous fluid, before accelerating upward and vanishing into the night sky.
NATO naval forces operating in the North Atlantic reported frequent encounters with unidentified submerged objects, USOs in military parlance, that appeared on sonar, traveling at speeds exceeding 100 knots, far beyond the capability of any known submarine. These objects would appear suddenly, pace naval vessels for hours, then dive to depths that made pursuit impossible. One particularly well-documented case occurred in 1976, during naval exercises near the Azores. The Spanish naval vessel Atrevida detected a large sonar contact approaching from below. The object was massive. The sonar return suggested something at least 50 meters in length. It ascended from depths exceeding 4,000 meters, approaching the ship at high speed. The crew went to general quarters, uncertain whether they were encountering a submarine or something else. As the object neared the surface, sailors on deck reported seeing a greenish glow illuminating the water. Then, approximately 200 meters from the ship, the object broached, partially emerging above the waterline. The descriptions were consistent among multiple witnesses: a dark metallic surface, smooth and seamless, with no visible seams, hatches, or propulsion systems. The object remained partially visible for approximately 30 seconds, long enough for one sailor to capture 3 photographs with a handheld camera. Then it sank back beneath the surface and vanished from sonar. The photographs showed a curved surface, dark gray or black, with an unusual texture that one analyst described as neither quite metal nor organic, but something in between. The images were classified by the Spanish Navy. Decades later, after being leaked and examined by civilian researchers, they remained enigmatic, clear enough to show something unusual, but ambiguous enough to prevent definitive conclusions. The Atrevida encounter was not unique. Soviet submarine crews reported similar experiences, detecting massive sonar contacts operating at depths and speeds that defied known technology. American submarine commanders recorded incidents of being followed by objects that appeared and disappeared from sonar inexplicably, maintaining pursuit regardless of evasive maneuvers. In 1977, a classified U.S. Navy document, partially declassified decades later, acknowledged recurring encounters with unidentified submerged contacts exhibiting performance characteristics beyond known submarine technology. The document recommended continued monitoring and data collection, but made no attempt to explain the phenomena. By the 1980s, enough military personnel had witnessed these events that informal networks emerged, sailors and pilots sharing stories, comparing notes, attempting to understand what they had encountered. Some believed they were observing advanced Soviet technology, though the Cold War's end and subsequent revelations proved the Soviets had been equally baffled by similar encounters. Others proposed that the objects were remnants of an unknown civilization, perhaps pre-human, that had survived deep beneath the oceans. A few voices, marginalized but persistent, suggested something more unsettling, that the objects were not remnants, but active craft, that something intelligent inhabited the deep Atlantic, maintaining a presence there for reasons unknown, occasionally revealing itself to surface dwellers, but never making contact, never communicating, merely watching and waiting. Dr. Paul Diaz, a former Navy sonar technician who had tracked dozens of anomalous contacts during his service, wrote in a 1989 memoir, "We assumed the ocean was ours, that humanity had conquered the seas and everything within them answered to us. But what if we were wrong? What if the deep ocean was already inhabited, had been for eons, and we were the newcomers, the intruders stumbling into a realm we didn't understand?" His questions echoed a growing unease among those who had studied the phenomena closely. The underwater structures, the disappearances, and the sightings of objects moving between ocean and sky, when viewed together, they suggested not random anomalies, but a pattern of activity, a system of some kind operating beneath the Atlantic, hidden by depth and darkness, interacting occasionally with the human world, but remaining fundamentally separate and unknown.
If such a system existed, it implied intention. It implied intelligence. And that implication led to the most troubling question of all. If something inhabited the ocean depths, observing humanity's ships and aircraft, what were its intentions? Was it merely curious, indifferent to surface dwellers, or was it waiting, patient as the deep itself, for some future moment when it would emerge fully and make its presence undeniable? The testimonies could not answer these questions. Witnesses could only describe what they had seen, objects that defied physics as understood, moving through water and air with equal ease, appearing and vanishing like phantoms, leaving behind only questions and the faint luminous traces of their passage. For the military establishments of various nations, the incidents were troubling, but manageable. As long as the objects did not attack, did not interfere directly with operations, they could be monitored, documented, and officially explained away as atmospheric anomalies, equipment errors, or misidentifications. The uncomfortable truth that something unknown was sharing the oceans could be acknowledged in classified reports while publicly denied. But denial
required ignoring the accumulated weight of evidence. Thousands of reports across decades from trained observers across multiple nations describing phenomena that were consistent in behavior and characteristics. At some point, denial became less plausible than the uncomfortable alternative, accepting that the Atlantic held secrets that current science could not explain. And perhaps, some researchers suggested, those secrets were not merely passive mysteries waiting to be discovered. Perhaps they were active presences, watching humanity's progress, assessing our technological development, deciding when or if to reveal themselves fully. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, that we were not alone on our own planet, that something ancient and unknown shared the world with us, hidden beneath the waves, operating by rules and purposes we could not comprehend. But such thoughts required leaps of faith that most were unwilling to make. Science demanded evidence, repeatability, proof. The testimonies, however numerous and consistent, were still just stories. Compelling, perhaps, but not scientific data. The structures on the ocean floor were ambiguous, possibly geological. The sonar contacts could be equipment errors or natural phenomena. Every piece of evidence, taken individually, could be explained away. It was only when viewed collectively, when the patterns were recognized and the correlations acknowledged, that the mystery deepened into something genuinely unsettling. And even then, even with the accumulated weight of decades of strange encounters and unexplained phenomena, the scientific establishment remained cautious, skeptical, unwilling to embrace explanations that challenged fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the world and the nature of intelligence itself, which brought the inquiry to a necessary pause, a moment to consider the alternative explanations, the rational interpretations that did not require accepting the existence of unknown intelligences lurking in the deep.
The ocean plays tricks on the mind. Depth distorts perception. Darkness breeds illusion. Pressure and isolation wear on human psychology in ways both subtle and profound. Anyone who has spent time at sea knows this. The ocean is a realm where the rational mind must constantly guard against its own tendency to see what isn't there, to interpret shadows as substance, to hear meaning in the random noise of waves and wind. Scientists and skeptics have long offered alternative explanations for the Atlantic anomalies, explanations that require no ancient civilizations, no hidden intelligences, no violations of known physical laws. Consider the sonar contacts. The ocean is not a uniform medium. Temperature gradients, salinity variations, and density layers create boundaries where sound waves refract and reflect in unexpected ways. A phenomenon called acoustic ducting can trap sound waves, bouncing them along temperature layers for hundreds of miles, creating false sonar returns that seem to indicate solid objects where none exist. Schools of fish, whale pods, and even dense clouds of plankton can produce sonar signatures that, under certain conditions, might be misinterpreted as artificial structures. Modern sonar is sophisticated, but it is not infallible. Equipment malfunctions, software glitches, and operator error occur more frequently than official reports might suggest. A skilled sonar operator can usually distinguish biological from geological contacts. But in the deep ocean, where conditions are extreme and unusual, even experienced personnel can be fooled. The geometric patterns detected on the seafloor, geology itself is capable of remarkable symmetry. Columnar basalt, volcanic rock that cools into hexagonal columns, can create formations that appear strikingly artificial. The Giant's Causeway in Ireland and Devil's Postpile in California are natural examples of such formations, so regular and geometric that myths once attributed them to gods or giants. Underwater volcanic activity, combined with tectonic stresses and erosion, can produce features that human minds interpret as walls, roads, or structures. Pareidolia, the tendency to see faces in clouds or patterns in randomness, is a powerful cognitive bias. When combined with the desire to discover something extraordinary, it becomes even more potent. The metallic samples collected from the ocean floor, Earth's crust contains concentrations of metal ores, including iron-nickel deposits from ancient asteroid impacts. Hydrothermal processes can create metal-rich crusts and nodules on the seafloor. The unusual crystalline structures observed in some samples could result from extreme pressure and temperature conditions deep in the ocean, processes not yet fully understood, but not necessarily artificial. As for the disappearances of ships and aircraft, the ocean is deadly. Simple as that. Sudden storms can arise with minimal warning. Rogue waves, massive walls of water that tower 30 meters high, are now known to be more common than previously thought, capable of capsizing even large vessels. Structural failures can occur catastrophically, giving crews no time to issue distress calls. Poor maintenance, human error, and navigation mistakes claim lives with tragic regularity. The statistical clustering of disappearances in certain Atlantic regions, those regions are also areas of high traffic density, complex weather patterns, and challenging navigational conditions. More ships and aircraft transit through those zones, therefore statistically more will be lost there. The human mind seeks patterns and finds them, even in random distributions. The testimonies of objects emerging from the ocean, atmospheric phenomena can create remarkable visual effects. Ball lightning, though poorly understood, is known to occur over water. Bioluminescent organisms, squid, jellyfish, and plankton can produce bright displays when disturbed, creating lights beneath the surface that might be mistaken for craft. Reflections, mirages, and optical illusions are common at sea, especially at night or in conditions of low visibility. Radar and sonar returns showing objects descending to impossible depths, equipment malfunctions, atmospheric anomalies, and operator misinterpretation are all more plausible than the existence of unknown underwater craft. Military technology is sophisticated, but not perfect. False contacts occur. Thermal layers and density gradients can produce sonar ghosts, phantom returns that mimic solid objects but disappear upon closer examination.
Dr. Richard Greenwell, a marine biologist who spent decades studying ocean ecosystems, argued forcefully against exotic explanations. The deep ocean is strange enough without inventing mysteries. We've barely explored 5% of the seafloor. There are species down there we've never seen, geological processes we don't fully understand, phenomena that science hasn't yet described, but that doesn't mean we should leap to extraordinary conclusions. The ocean is alien, yes, but it's still our ocean, governed by the same physical laws that operate everywhere else on Earth. His perspective represents mainstream scientific thinking. Acknowledge the mysteries, pursue investigation, but resist the temptation to embrace explanations that contradict established knowledge without overwhelming evidence.
And that evidence, skeptics argue, simply doesn't exist. What we have instead is a collection of ambiguous data, subjective testimonies, and tantalizing but inconclusive findings. Individually, each piece of evidence has plausible, conventional explanations. Collectively, they suggest mysteries, yes, but mysteries that likely result from our incomplete understanding of natural processes, rather than from the presence of something artificial or intelligent. This skeptical perspective is not merely stubborn dismissal. It represents a disciplined approach to knowledge. The insistence that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, that science advances through rigorous testing and replication, not through speculation based on incomplete data. If artificial structures truly existed on the Atlantic floor, surely modern deep-sea exploration, with its advanced submersibles, high-resolution sonar, and remotely operated vehicles, would have documented them conclusively by now. If objects were routinely emerging from the ocean and entering the sky, surely satellite surveillance and advanced tracking systems would have captured definitive evidence. The absence of such evidence, skeptics argue, is itself evidence. Evidence that the phenomena, while genuinely puzzling, likely have mundane explanations that future research will reveal. Perhaps the hexagonal formations are unusual geological features awaiting proper analysis. Perhaps the metallic samples are terrestrial alloys formed through processes not yet understood. Perhaps the disappearances, tragic though they are, result from a combination of human error, equipment failure, and the ocean's inherent dangers. Perhaps the sightings of luminous objects are misidentifications of natural phenomena, their strangeness amplified by the human tendency to see intention and design where none exists. These are reasonable positions held by reasonable people based on reasonable interpretations of ambiguous evidence. They deserve consideration and respect. But there is another perspective, one that acknowledges the skeptical arguments but finds them insufficient to fully explain the accumulated patterns. This perspective asks, at what point does the accumulation of anomalies, each individually explainable perhaps, but collectively persistent, suggest that something genuinely unusual is occurring? If a single sonar operator reports a strange contact, that's anecdote. If dozens of operators across decades from multiple nations and military services report similar contacts in the same regions, that becomes data. If a single pilot sees lights over the ocean, that's illusion.
If hundreds of pilots and sailors report similar sightings with enough consistency to identify patterns, that becomes something harder to dismiss. The tension between skepticism and acceptance of anomalous phenomena reflects a broader challenge in science: how to investigate claims that fall outside current theoretical frameworks without either dismissing them prematurely or accepting them uncritically. The ocean, in its vastness and mystery, embodies this challenge perfectly. It is a realm that constantly surprises us, revealing phenomena we never predicted: hydrothermal vent ecosystems, gigantic squid, bioluminescent creatures of surreal beauty. Each discovery reminds us that our knowledge remains incomplete, that the ocean holds secrets we have not yet imagined. Perhaps the Atlantic anomalies are simply more examples of that incompleteness, natural phenomena awaiting scientific explanation, destined to eventually be understood through patient research and technological advancement. Or perhaps they are something else entirely. Perhaps the ocean guards not just biological and geological secrets, but secrets of a different order. Echoes of history so ancient that they predate human memory. Artifacts of intelligence that did not originate with us. The question remains open, unresolved, suspended between doubt and possibility. And perhaps that uncertainty itself is instructive, a reminder that the universe is not obligated to reveal its secrets on our schedule or conform to our expectations.
The myths, remember. Long before submarines descended into the Atlantic depths, before sonar mapped the sea floor, coastal peoples told stories of gods and beings who dwelt beneath the waves. These were not mere superstitions or poetic metaphors. They were detailed traditions passed through generations, describing encounters with intelligences that emerged from the ocean, interacted with humanity, then returned to the deep. The ancient Greeks spoke of Atlantis, Plato's account of an advanced island civilization that sunk beneath the Atlantic in a single catastrophic day and night. Modern scholarship largely dismisses the story as allegory, a philosophical parable about hubris and divine punishment. But what if the myth preserved a kernel of truth? What if something did vanish beneath the Atlantic, leaving behind only fragments and the fading memory of civilizations that came before? The Celtic peoples of Ireland and Scotland told of the Fomorians, ancient beings associated with the sea, described as possessing supernatural powers and advanced knowledge. They were said to dwell beneath the waves, emerging occasionally to influence human affairs before retreating to their underwater realm. The myths describe them as neither fully human nor divine, but something other. Beings of great age and terrible purpose. In West African traditions, the Dogon people speak of the Nomo, amphibious beings who came from the sky and entered the water, bringing knowledge and wisdom to humanity. The Dogon myths describe these beings in surprising detail, including astronomical knowledge that seems anachronistic for an ancient oral tradition. The Taino people of the Caribbean told of Atabe, the goddess of fresh water and fertility who dwelt in both sea and sky, mediating between the celestial and aquatic realms. Their myths describe luminous beings emerging from the ocean at night, bringing messages and omens.
Even the Vikings, those master sailors, spoke of creatures beneath the North Atlantic, not mere sea monsters, but intelligent beings who observed longships from the depths, sometimes interfering with voyages, sometimes allowing safe passage. What unites these diverse traditions, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, is a consistent theme: the ocean as a realm inhabited by intelligence, a boundary between the known human world and something older, something that preceded human civilization and might outlast it. Modern anthropology explains these myths as humanity's attempt to personify the ocean's power, to make comprehensible the vast and frightening forces of water and storm. Gods and sea beings were metaphors for natural phenomena, the unpredictability of weather, the danger of deep water, the mystery of what lay beyond the horizon. But there is another interpretation, one that takes the myths more literally. What if ancient peoples genuinely encountered something in or emerging from the ocean? What if they witnessed phenomena they could only describe in the language of gods and spirits because they lacked the technological vocabulary to describe craft, structures, or non-human intelligence? Consider Plato's account of Atlantis. He claimed the story came from Egyptian priests who in turn said it was ancient history passed down through their own predecessors. Plato dated the destruction of Atlantis to approximately 9,600 BCE, nearly 12,000 years ago, long before the rise of any known advanced civilization. Mainstream archaeology places the emergence of complex human societies around 3000 BCE at the earliest, with the Sumerian and Egyptian civilizations. The idea of an advanced civilization existing 9,000 years earlier contradicts all established chronology. Therefore, Atlantis must be fiction. But what if the chronology is wrong? What if the Atlantic catastrophically flooded during the end of the last ice age around 10,000 BCE, when sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted? Coastal settlements would have been submerged, their remains now resting beneath hundreds of feet of water and sediment, invisible to archaeologists who excavate only on land. Underwater archaeology is a young field, severely limited by the difficulty and expense of deep-sea exploration. We have not systematically searched the Atlantic's submerged continental shelves, the shallow regions that were dry land during the Ice Age and would have been prime locations for human settlement. If coastal civilizations existed during that period, we would not know. Their ruins would be buried beneath the sea, in regions we have barely explored. The absence of evidence, in this case, is not evidence of absence. It is simply evidence that we have not yet looked carefully enough in the right places. Could Atlantis have been real, not as a magical empire with impossible technology, but as a relatively advanced coastal civilization that was destroyed when sea levels rose? And could the myths of that civilization passed through generations and embellished over centuries have preserved some memory of what existed before the flood? It is speculation, of course, but it is speculation rooted in possibility rather than fantasy. The Atlantic holds secrets not because it is inherently magical, but because it is vast, deep, and largely unexplored. If human civilizations were lost beneath its waves, we might not discover them for centuries, not until we develop the technology to systematically survey and excavate the ocean floor. And if human civilizations might lie hidden there,
What about non-human ones? The question seems absurd at first, but consider, life on Earth is nearly 4 billion years old. Homo sapiens has existed for perhaps 300,000 years, a blink in geological time. For billions of years before humans emerged, Earth was inhabited by other forms of life, some surprisingly complex and intelligent. Cephalopods, octopi, squid, and cuttlefish possess intelligence that evolved independently from vertebrate intelligence. They solve problems, use tools, display individuality, and communicate through color changes. They are alien minds, sharing our planet, but following entirely different evolutionary paths. What if in Earth's deep past, another intelligent species emerged? Not mammals or birds, but something marine, adapted to the ocean, developing technology that worked underwater rather than on land. Such a civilization would leave entirely different archaeological traces than terrestrial humans. Their structures would be beneath the waves, possibly built from materials that corrode or erode more readily than stone. Their history would not be written in clay tablets or inscribed on monuments, but recorded in forms we might not recognize as writing at all. This is admittedly wild speculation, straying far from any evidence. But the myths persist, and they speak with surprising consistency of beings in the ocean, intelligent, purposeful, watching humanity from the depths. Perhaps those myths preserve not literal history, but psychological truth, the human intuition that we are not alone, that the ocean holds mysteries beyond fish and geology, that something waits in the deep places of the world. Or perhaps the myths are more literal than we assume. Perhaps ancient peoples genuinely witnessed phenomena emerging from the ocean, craft of unknown origin, beings that did not match any known form of life, encounters that could only be described in the language of gods and spirits because no other vocabulary existed. The line between myth and history is often blurred. Heinrich Schliemann excavated Troy by taking Homer's Iliad as historical source material. What was dismissed as pure myth proved to contain enough geographical accuracy to lead to real archaeological discovery. Perhaps the Atlantic myths deserve similar reconsideration. Not blind acceptance, but careful analysis, treating them as potential repositories of forgotten knowledge rather than mere primitive superstition. If the ocean floor contains artificial structures, if objects emerge from the deep, if disappearances cluster in specific regions, then perhaps the myths were right all along. Perhaps the ocean is inhabited. Perhaps something ancient and unknown dwells there still, maintaining a presence beneath the waves, occasionally revealing itself to surface dwellers, but never fully emerging, never making contact in ways that would force the world to acknowledge its existence. The thought echoes through the myths and the modern reports alike, that humanity is not the only intelligence on Earth, that we share this world with something older, something that chooses to remain hidden, watching and waiting for reasons we cannot comprehend. It is a thought that unsettles, because it challenges the fundamental assumption that Earth belongs to humanity, that we are the dominant intelligence, the species that will ultimately understand and control everything. But what if we are wrong? What if the deep ocean is not ours to explore and exploit, but someone else's domain and we are the intruders? The myths do not answer these questions. They only ask them in the form of stories told around fires on ancient shorelines, warnings passed down through generations. Be careful when you venture onto the water. Something watches from below. Respect the ocean's power, for it is older than you, deeper than you can imagine, and it does not belong to you. Those warnings seem quaint in the age of steel ships and nuclear submarines.
We believe we have conquered the seas, that modern technology has banished mystery and made the ocean legible to human understanding. But perhaps the ocean has not been conquered at all. Perhaps we have merely scratched its surface, literally and figuratively, while the true depths remain unknown, unvisited, and inhabited by presences we are not yet ready to meet.
The signals continue. Even now, decades into the 21st century, with satellite networks encircling the globe and sensors monitoring every vibration of the planet, the Atlantic anomalies persist. The sonar contacts still appear on military screens. The disappearances, though less frequent, still occur. And those who monitor the deep report something that suggests the phenomena are not merely passive geological features, but something active, something that might be watching. In 2017, the Ocean Networks Canada project, a civilian research initiative monitoring seismic activity in marine life, detected an unusual acoustic pattern in the North Atlantic. The sound was rhythmic, repeating at regular intervals, too structured to be geological or biological. It lasted for approximately 72 hours, then ceased abruptly. Analysis of the frequency and pattern yielded no match to any known natural source. The researchers published their findings in a peer-reviewed journal, presenting the sound as an interesting anomaly worthy of further investigation. The media briefly picked up the stories, speculating about everything from whale songs to underwater volcanic activity. But the scientific community noted something unsettling about the signal. It came from a region where, decades earlier, sonar anomalies and geometric formations had been reported. The coordinates placed the source within a few miles of locations documented in classified military reports from the 1970s. Coincidence, perhaps. The ocean is full of strange sounds, but the timing and location added one more data point to the accumulating pattern. In 2019, the U.S. Navy confirmed publicly for the first time that pilots had been encountering unidentified aerial phenomena, objects displaying flight characteristics that defied known physics. Several of the encounters occurred over the Atlantic, with pilots reporting objects that descended into the ocean and continued moving underwater. The Navy's acknowledgement was carefully worded, avoiding speculation about origin or nature, but it marked a shift, an official recognition that something was occurring, something that warranted investigation rather than dismissal. For those who had studied the Atlantic mysteries for years, the Navy's statement felt like vindication. The phenomena were real, documented, and officially acknowledged as unknown. Whether they represented advanced technology, natural phenomena, or something else entirely remained unanswered, but at least the question was being asked openly. In 2021, the U.S. government released a preliminary report on unidentified aerial phenomena, analyzing 144 encounters reported by military personnel between 2004 and 2021. The report was cautious, acknowledging that most incidents remained unexplained, but avoiding definitive conclusions about their nature. Buried in the report was a brief mention that some objects had been observed transitioning between air and water, a capability that no known human technology possesses. The implications were not explored further in the public document, but they pointed directly to the phenomena that Atlantic mariners and naval personnel had been reporting for decades. Something was moving between the ocean and the sky, something that defied current understanding of physics and engineering, and it was happening over the Atlantic with sufficient frequency that even cautious government agencies could no longer entirely ignore it.
The question, of course, was what these objects might be and what their presence signified. One hypothesis suggested advanced military technology, perhaps secret programs developing craft capable of underwater and aerial operation. But this explanation struggled to account for the historical depth of the reports. If these were experimental vehicles, they would have to represent a continuous program spanning 70 years from the 1950s to the present, without any leaks, failures, or public revelations. Given the difficulty of keeping secrets in the modern era, this seemed increasingly improbable. Another hypothesis proposed natural phenomena, electromagnetic effects, plasma formations, or atmospheric anomalies that created the appearance of craft where none existed. But this explanation could not easily account for the radar tracking, the sonar contacts, or the physical effects sometimes reported, such as electromagnetic interference with aircraft systems. A third hypothesis, embraced by a small but growing group of researchers, suggested something more radical, that the Atlantic was home to a non-human intelligence, possibly terrestrial but non-human, possibly extraterrestrial but operating from oceanic bases, monitoring humanity's progress with technology far beyond current human capability. This hypothesis was, of course, extraordinary. It demanded extraordinary evidence, and yet its proponents argued the accumulated data, the sonar anomalies, the structures, the disappearances, the object sightings, when taken collectively, pointed towards something that current scientific frameworks could not explain.
Dr. Kevin Manning, a physicist who had transitioned from academic research to investigating anomalous phenomena, wrote in 2020, "We have reached a point where denial requires more assumptions than acceptance. To dismiss all the sonar data as equipment error, all the pilot testimonies as misidentifications, all the structures as geology, and all the electromagnetic effects as coincidence requires believing in an improbable series of separate explanations. The simpler hypothesis that something genuinely anomalous is present in the Atlantic may actually be more scientifically reasonable." His argument represented a shift in thinking among some researchers that the accumulation of evidence, even if each piece was individually ambiguous, collectively suggested a phenomenon deserving serious scientific investigation rather than dismissal. But mainstream science remained cautious. Funding for such investigations was difficult to secure. Academic careers could be damaged by association with topics considered fringe or pseudoscientific, and without institutional support, comprehensive study of the Atlantic anomalies remained dependent on amateur researchers, private funding, and the occasional leaked military document. Meanwhile, the phenomena continued. In 2022, commercial satellite imagery captured what appeared to be large disturbances on the ocean surface in the mid-Atlantic, circular patterns of churning water with no apparent meteorological cause. The images circulated on social media, generating speculation and debate. Oceanographers proposed explanations involving upwelling currents or subsurface volcanic activity, but the patterns appeared in regions where no volcanic activity was known to exist. Were these new manifestations of the phenomena, mundane oceanographic processes, or something else, something that had always been there but was only now becoming visible through improved satellite coverage? The questions multiplied faster than the answers, and perhaps that was the nature of the mystery, that it would continue to reveal itself in fragments and glimpses, never quite offering definitive proof, but never quite fading away either. For those who believed something waited beneath the Atlantic, the recent revelations were encouraging. The world was finally beginning to acknowledge what they had argued for decades, that the ocean held unexplained phenomena worthy of serious investigation. For skeptics, the recent attention simply demonstrated how easily people could be led astray by ambiguous data and the desire to believe in something extraordinary. The debate would continue, likely for decades more. But beneath that debate, beneath the arguments and the speculation, the Atlantic itself remained vast, deep, and unconcerned with human opinions. Whatever secrets it held would be revealed on its own schedule, in its own way, when or if humanity developed the wisdom and technology to properly understand them. And in the meantime, the ocean kept watch. The sonar echoed through the deep. The structures rested beneath their layers of sediment. And if something intelligent dwelt in those depths, it continued its patient observation, waiting for the moment when contact would finally occur, or perhaps waiting for humanity to destroy itself, leaving the ocean in peace once more.
The abyss does not answer. We stand at the edge of the continental shelf, looking down into darkness, and we realize how little we truly know. For all our technology, all our scientific advancement, the deep ocean remains fundamentally alien, a realm where human presence is fleeting and fragile, where we are visitors tolerated by the crushing pressure and eternal night, not conquerors who have claimed dominion. 5%. That is how much of the ocean floor we have mapped in high resolution. 95% remains as unknown as the surface of distant planets. We have better maps of Mars than of our own seafloor. We have sent more people into space than into the deepest ocean trenches. This is not an accident of history. It reflects the ocean's fundamental hostility to human exploration. Space is empty, vacuum surrounding you, but not crushing you. The deep ocean is full, water pressing from all sides with force that crumples steel and destroys electronics. Darkness is absolute, temperatures hover near freezing, and every descent is a calculated risk, a gamble that the technology will hold, that the submersible will rise again, that you will not join the countless others who have vanished beneath the waves. In this context, the Atlantic anomalies take on a different character. They are not merely mysteries to be solved, but reminders of how much remains unknown. The structures, the signals, the objects, whether natural or artificial, terrestrial or otherwise, they represent the vast frontier that still exists on Earth, the reminder that our planet has not been fully explored or understood. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson of the Atlantic mystery: humility. We are clever apes who learned to shape metal and harness electricity. We have split atoms and traveled to the moon. We have sequenced genomes and built computers that mimic thought. We are, by our own estimation, the dominant intelligence on Earth, the species that will ultimately comprehend and control all natural phenomena. But the ocean suggests otherwise. It suggests that dominance is an illusion, that our understanding is shallow, that mysteries remain not because we haven't yet gotten around to solving them, but because they are genuinely beyond our current capacity to understand. If artificial structures rest on the Atlantic floor, they have been there far longer than our civilization has existed. If objects move through the ocean with capabilities we cannot duplicate, they operate by principles we have not discovered. If something intelligent inhabits the deep, it has chosen to remain hidden, suggesting either indifference to humanity or a deliberate decision to avoid contact. In any of these scenarios, we are not in control. We are observers, witnesses to phenomena that occur whether we understand them or not, whether we believe in them or not. This realization can be unsettling. It challenges the narrative of human progress, the idea that we are steadily solving mysteries, expanding knowledge, bringing the unknown into the light. But perhaps that narrative is too simple. Perhaps reality is more complex, containing phenomena that will remain mysterious not temporarily, but permanently, because they operate at scales or by principles that human consciousness cannot fully grasp. The ocean may be one such phenomenon. We can map its surface, sail across it, extract resources from it, but we may never truly understand it. Its depths may always remain alien, its secrets perpetually just beyond reach. And if that is true, then the Atlantic anomalies are not problems to be solved, but realities to be accepted. Reminders that the world contains more than our philosophies have dreamed of, that mystery is not a gap in knowledge waiting to be filled, but a permanent feature of existence. There is strange comfort in this thought. It suggests that wonder will never be exhausted, that no matter how much we learn, there will always be more. More depth, more strangeness, more questions that lead not to answers, but to deeper questions still. The sonar continues to echo through the Atlantic. The deep-sea vehicles descend and rise. The satellites monitor from above. And slowly, piece by piece, we gather data, constructing models of what might exist beneath the waves. Perhaps one day, we will descend to the anomalous locations with technology capable of definitively determining what rests there. We will illuminate the structures, analyze their composition, understand their origin. The mystery will be solved, one way or another. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the ocean will guard its secrets a while longer. Perhaps the phenomena will continue to manifest in ways that tantalize but never quite prove. Perhaps we will remain suspended between doubt and belief, certainty and uncertainty for decades or centuries more.
In the end, it may not matter which is true. The value of the mystery is not in its solution, but in its existence. The reminder that our world is stranger and deeper than we imagine, that the map of reality contains blank spaces labeled "Here there be mysteries," and that those blank spaces are not failures of knowledge, but invitations to wonder. So we return to the surface, leaving the abyss to its silence. We document what we have found, knowing it is incomplete. We speculate, knowing certainty eludes us. We continue to search, knowing the answers may never come. And the Atlantic remains, vast, patient, eternal. Its depths hold secrets that predate human language, memories older than mountains, and perhaps intelligences that have watched the rise and fall of species across geological epochs. If they exist, those watchers beneath the waves, they have seen trilobites and dinosaurs, mammoths and mastodons,
the birth of forests, and the carving of continents. They have witnessed the brief flicker of human civilization, our cities built and crumbled, our empires risen and fallen, our technologies advancing from stone tools to satellites in what must seem, to them, the blink of an eye. And they have remained, constant and hidden, guardians of the deep, waiting in the cold darkness where light cannot follow. Perhaps one day we will meet them. Perhaps contact will occur and humanity will finally know what rests beneath the Atlantic's waves. Or perhaps the ocean will keep its secrets still and we will pass from the earth having never truly understood the world we inhabited. Either way, the mystery endures. And in its endurance, it teaches us something more valuable than any answer could, that we are small, our knowledge limited, our time brief, and the universe vast beyond comprehension. The Atlantic stretches before us, 3,000 miles of rolling blue, hiding valleys deeper than mountains are tall, and in those valleys, in the silence and pressure and eternal night, something waits. Whether we ever discover what it is may be less important than the fact that it exists at all. A reminder that wonder is real, that mystery is not a problem but a gift, and that the unknown is not our enemy but our companion on this strange journey through existence. So we drift now toward the surface, toward the light, carrying with us questions and fragmentary answers, patterns and possibilities. The deep recedes below, returning to its silence, patient as stone, older than memory. And we are left with the knowledge that the ocean has not revealed all its secrets, that the Atlantic holds mysteries still, and that perhaps, just perhaps, we are not alone on this blue world spinning through the cosmic dark. Thank you for drifting with us into the unknown. The Atlantic will continue its slow roll, indifferent to our curiosity, keeping its counsel as it has for millions of years. Whether the anomalies we have explored tonight are geological accidents, remnants of forgotten civilizations, or something stranger still, they remind us that Earth remains a frontier, vast, deep, and fundamentally mysterious. If this journey has stirred something within you, curiosity, wonder, or perhaps a quiet unease, then consider sharing your thoughts below. The mysteries of the deep deserve conversation, contemplation, and perhaps a touch of healthy skepticism balanced with openness to the unknown. Until we descend again into the darkness together, remember, the ocean is patient, and some secrets are worth the wait. Sleep well knowing the Atlantic keeps its watch tonight as it always has, as it always will, silent, deep, and full of whispers that only the brave dare to hear.